Okay, it is 7 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. Question for the board. The minutes were sent out only a few days ago because the meeting was so short, the interim. Should we review the minutes this evening, or is it the pleasure of the board to wait till the next meeting?
Move we wait till the next meeting.
Any objections? Okay, so tonight, the agenda called for us to review the comments that were summarized by the subcommittee. Unless there's an objection, what I'd like to do is ask Dave Morganelli, since he's done all the aggregating of the comments, to read what he's prepared for us that was sent out to you by email today, and I made a copy, so you should have a copy in front of you. And I would ask that we give David his due and let him go through his report. Then secondly, I'm going to ask Chris Moore, and Mark Shane asked that we send, or that we read the notes he sent, so Chris will summarize those. Then I would like to open it up. But this way we'll give David a chance to read what he's done all his work on. Any objections? No. Then one side note, I would like to read into the record that we thank John Kelly. He has officially resigned because of his travel and his family commitments. Honorable, he said he does not believe he has the time to dedicate to the committee. So if it changes, we hope he'll come back, but at this point, he's resigned. Okay?
How many members do we have now with his resignation?
14.
Did he submit a letter?
He submitted a letter to the selectmen. I read the letter, and I'm just paraphrasing it.
They're the appointing authority now.
Hmm?
Correct.
They're the appointing authority.
No, it's correct that he should submit the letter to him,
Absolutely.
but in case anybody didn't catch their email and see the letter, I just wanted everybody to know, and I want it in the record, that he's been a hard-working member, and personally, I would welcome back his presence at any time. So, hearing no other comments, David, we'd like to give you the time you need to read what your subcommittee put together.
Okay, I don't know any better way to do this than to basically kind of go through the list that I've put. I took everyone's comments, first of all. I got all the emails, including Mark's, but if I miss any, please feel free, because there were a lot of things going back and forth. And I think the best way to do it is to go through the list, and I restructured the memo so that to any reader who's reading this, it's a little bit more intuitive and organized, and I kind of organized it by category and topic. So, is that okay? If I go through it,
I think you should, because the objective
summarize each section?
The objective is tonight that you would update this and submit it to our chair
Correct.
tomorrow.
So the goal is to, this is not a final memo. I didn't want to issue it to anybody in final form, because then people start making comments like this is our official position, and the goal would be to finalize it and then issue it to the selectmen as
So
soon
the
as
goal would be to
possible, which is
vote
what
on
I
it
had.
tonight.
Correct.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you know, I have a number of comments that I would like to make regarding the host agreement as they relate to the items that, in this letter. Do you want me to wait?
What I would
until-
ask is, let's let David go through, Chris, and then we'll ask you to go after that and give you the proper time
Okay.
to address each point that you want to.
Okay, all right.
Before I do that, can I ask you, are your comments like, are you adding totally different points?
Well, no.
What I have here, or
I-
are you changing a little bit as to what's in here?
No, if you look at some of the exhibits in the host agreement, they cover some of the items that we're talking about.
Right.
So I really want to reference some of these items back to the host agreement, which I think kind of makes sense.
That's a good point. I didn't do that, but that's a good point.
Well, let's go through your items. Then, once we have those.
I'll wait till you're done, David.
Yeah,
before
that's,
I-
once we have those on the
Okay.
table,
All right.
and Chris's, then each of us, Phil, you'll be next, go through.
Okay.
And you can add to any point, because this, as David said, was not meant to be a final document. What David did for us is give us a working document to discuss tonight, and when we're done tonight, we'll ask for a vote on the amended report.
Okay.
So, David, you're on.
Okay, so the first item goes back to the first draft of the memo, really didn't change all that substantially. And it relates to the spreadsheets that we went through with Paul, and the numbers that Paul gave us, which is new growth with the addition of the casino of 19 million, their new valuation of $653 million. We went through different scenarios so that if a variety of the dollar amounts that are, if they're taken off of the levy or added back to the levy, it causes a fluctuation in what the casino itself as an owner then has to pay, and there are diminishing returns, and we talked about that. So Paul's point, and I think we talked about this last time, was that there should be a base, a minimum floor that we want to recommend, or at least apprise the selectmen that they should be concerned in their negotiation that there should be a floor, so that we don't have diminishing returns. What that number is still open to debate until we finalize this. But my point in this first paragraph, in summary, and just to summarize it, and you can read it for yourself, is that the baseline should be about $19 million, so that, and I think the way you would get there is, they give us money that's added to the tax rate, we do our thing with, year by year, adding money back to the tax rate, their potential property tax would go down, but they would make a payment after that back to the town, and the net effect of what they pay us back later, in addition to what their property tax went down to, should equal no less than 19 million. That's the point. So I wanted everybody, is that accurate, Paul, the way I summarized that? Okay, any questions on number one? Okay, number two, turn the page. This has to do with the mitigation measures, and again, if anybody has any comments vis-a-vis what's in these gigantic materials that we have, a lot of the stuff that we have in the materials relates to these different paragraphs. Okay, in no particular order. The first one just had to do with additional staffing, and that funds should be required from Foxwoods due to additional police, fire, and Board of Health. In the spreadsheets we looked at, I did see for the addition of a set number of police, fire, and Board of Health employees. If it was in there, I missed it. I didn't see anything for highway personnel. And I think we talked about that at the meeting the other day. I came in late, so if I'm wrong on that, that would have to be changed. But because of the high traffic and other things at the highway department, I have to imagine they will be doing a certain number of things. There should be a negotiated fund for that. Second thing was COLA. We talked about the collective bargaining agreements, and at the meeting we had the other night, we talked about the fund, or the amount that the casino would pay, because year after year you have a COLA adjustment. The concern I wanted them to be aware of is that a COLA adjustment should not be based on any kind of an average COLA or a discounted COLA. And some people have expressed to me a concern that it's not a pure COLA the way it's in the draft host agreement. It's a fraction, however it's written. It's a formulaic thing that is not giving us our full due. So however the selectmen negotiated, I think our point to them is just to be careful that the COLA is a full COLA. Third one is the unemployment escrow, because we would be adding people to the additional payroll. We would also be potentially impacting what could come out of unemployment if anybody were to be laid off subsequent to adding them. So that was pretty straightforward. The other one, again, we talked about the other night, was the OPEB, or other post-employment benefits. We've talked in the past about the unfunded OPEB liability and the significance of the liability, and Barbara Ogier, when she was here, had come in numerous times asking us to add to the fund to cover OPEB. But there is a cost to that, and I think our point to the selectmen is that they should negotiate some kind of addition to the OPEB fund. Okay, next one is local hiring. The local hiring and residency requirement, I equated this to similar to what they already do in TIF agreements. When you have a TIF agreement, you can have a set number of employees that an employer is required to hire from the residents of a town. And the way TIF agreements were first drafted, there was no check and balance in place. So employers would come in, they would say, I promise to add X number of jobs. And then Department of Revenue would come in a few years later and say, did you add that X number of jobs? And then the employer would say, well, no, you got me, I really didn't do that. So they changed the law, and I'm thinking we could do something similar here in a couple of different ways. It could be added to the host agreement that there is proof of residency, and in addition, there is a proof of residency for a set period of time and I thought about this a little bit more. What I put in this paragraph is for an established period of time of at least 6 months. Originally, I thought maybe a year or 2 years we could do it, but it might be a little too onerous and might rub people the wrong way. But the point is that you don't want the casino to say, we are now hiring from residents of Milford from that pool, and then all of a sudden you have an influx of people who suddenly move here simply to become residents so they can get the job, and they are really not devoted to the town in any significant way.
So, David, what's the recourse if they don't?
If they
Well,
don't, I mean,
Mike, could you just hold off, let him finish, then write that down? I will call on you after Phil.
All right.
And I'm sorry, I just want to really give him, he's put a lot of time in, I want to give them time uninterrupted. I will call on you.
okay, the next one is, and I think this was a point from Will and maybe some others, the multi-family unit rehabilitation slash, or in addition to regional transportation fund. And I think the idea here is, and the selectmen may already be talking about this, but to have the casino set aside a set fund with additional monies to rehab multifamily residential units in the town. What we don't want it to be is a way to subsidize private developers, because we're not really in the business of subsidizing improvements and then they turn around, increase rent, and the benefit of that increased rent goes to the private developer. But what I suggested in this paragraph was that we do something so that the town of Milford has a rate of return, and it could be something as simple as they have a fund. You can draw on it to get either low interest or zero interest loans, or with favorable payback terms, however it's negotiated. And that way there's a return on Milford's investment, and there would also have to be checks and balances put in place, so that's kind of obvious, but sometimes people forget to negotiate that, and we want to make sure that the funds that are used for their stated purpose. Okay, the next one was arbitration of mitigation needs. I think this came from you, Chris. There's a lot of things they can negotiate, and the terms can be wildly varied from host agreement to host agreement, or, compared to what we've done anybody's ever done in the past and the history of these things. But I think the point is that we won't know until we get into this and roll up our sleeves if the mitigation funds are adequate. And it's possible that the funds are not adequate for any number of reasons. They're not structured the right way, the money's not the right amount, it's going for the wrong purpose. And the point here would be to have a clause so that an arbitration with an independent third-party arbitrator could be appointed, mutually appointed and agreed upon, so that they could negotiate a clause, reopen it, almost like a reopener clause. And if they have to make an adjustment to it, we should have the right to do that. The next one is the split tax rate, or slash dual, also known as the dual tax rate. Paul, as you know, ran different calculations using unified tax rate and the dual tax rate. The point here is that unless something changes in the way the taxes are calculated, there should really never be a single unified tax rate, because it will only be to the detriment of residential taxpayers. So we've heard some rumors that, maybe that was being requested or considered, but I don't think anybody should ever really consider a unified single tax rate. It should continue to be a dual tax rate. The number 4 is the reduction in state aid, and how you would address the reduction in state aid. What our sources have told us from the Department of Education and the Department of Revenue is that, and this is kind of a critical point, is that even though Milford could be getting $20 million, if you round up $19 million, from the casino, there could be a reduction to the town of Milford in Chapter 70 funds, which are used for education, and Chapter 90 funds, which are used for transportation and local highway capital projects. So we don't know what that reduction would be. Our sources are telling us it could be as high as 10% in state aid, so if we're getting approximately $23 million in state aid, that's $2.3 million reduction. You take that off the $19 million, and now you're down to, less than $17 million net. So the point is that when we talk about the funds that Milford would be potentially getting, it's only really accurate to talk about it in a net formula and not in a gross formula, because the gross formula is really meaningless. We need confirmation, and I think the selectmen need confirmation as to what that net true effect would be going forward. Another point we talked about the other day, it's the last part of that, number 4, second paragraph, is that the addition of the new growth from the casino would be added to the tax levy, and if anything were to happen to the casino, such as entering into bankruptcy proceedings, they leave town, they close up, their valuations go way down, somehow they're able to reduce their payments, you're stuck with a higher tax levy, and there's really no way to absorb it. So if they leave town, enter into bankruptcy protections, and I don't think we really understand the full ramifications of them being affiliated with a casino or being affiliated with an Indian tribe or being owned by an Indian tribe. But if there's a reduction because they leave, that reduction would be absorbed by residential and commercial taxpayers. So the point is that there should be an ease-out/make whole, or whatever you want to call it, clause, similar to what was in the Enron agreement, or even better than what was put into the Enron agreement, so that if any addition to the tax levy because of them goes away in the future because they then leave, they should make us whole. And then the last point is, we are respectfully requesting that the Board of Selectmen consult with and give the Finance Committee the courtesy of seeing a final draft of the negotiation of the host community agreement before signature is put on it. And we feel like we've done a good job, and everybody in this committee has done a good job of having input. And this is where we are at this point. So, Al, if you want to open it up to additional comments, we can add to. And
I would like to now go to Chris Moran, and then we have Phil, Willie, and Mike. So, Chris?
Mark had given me several notes prior actually to receiving David's report. So with that being said, some of the things have been answered in this report, so I'm eliminating some of those. He did have some other questions as well as comments on the host agreement, so because he is not here, I'm just going to kind of batch them all as one. And then I had a couple of comments as well. First, I had a question about that we did not include in David's thing, which is very good, by the way, David, that the mitigation, not only are we missing the highway, but mitigation for sewer, health, inspections, town engineer. If you looked at the mitigation study that we received, things not included in the host agreement that were submitted by department heads, it equals almost $1 million per year on an annual basis for those departments I named, and $1 million in one-time upfront costs that we received in this report right here that they did not include in the host agreement. So right now, they're assuming that out of their $19 million, that we're paying for that other mitigation, besides what was included for police, fire, and the schools. That's the only thing that's written directly in the host agreement. Everything else, and it was also in the HRNA mitigation report, are only for those departments, and none of the other departments that we received mitigation reports, those amounts are included. And they include almost $1 million, not almost, over $1 million, 1.07 in yearly costs, and 1.05 million in upfront one-time costs that we are gonna have to absorb ourselves if they're not included in the host agreement. And I think that should be added in here. You added highway. I think all the other departments should be totaled in there as well. And the other thing is that we did bring up the, on the mitigation, any arbitration, I just wanna stress that any arbitration or reopener, there cannot be a decrease. They cannot come back in arbitration and argue, but there's less school kids, but there's less travel on the roads. I want to know that the numbers that we included for the mitigation, that's where it starts. That's the base. I don't want it to come back where they're gonna argue and say, you know what, we're not as busy as we thought we were. You don't need as much money for the highway, you know, and argue that. So I wanted to make sure that it's included, that if we go into arbitration, the base is the numbers that were agreed upon by all our department heads. So I'd like to put that in as a recommendation to the selectmen as well. Mark's comments on the host agreement, he had some questions about the indication of any improvements if the casino left. Are any of the improvements, would we be responsible for them? Anything that they've done at any of our plants, anything they've done at the roads, would that be owed to whatever entity purchases the casino? Or if the casino leaves, is there any bills we owe? That was one of his questions. Also, one thing that David brought up that I had an issue with, as well as Mark had mentioned in his notes, the use of the CPI adjustment factor versus straight CPI. Because there's a very large difference in those numbers. And if you don't use straight CPI and you use the calculation that they have in there, and they repeatedly used the CPI adjustment factor instead of the CPI, could be significant loss to the town and monies that could be accrued because of the CPI increases and raises over the years. The other thing that he has is there's big sections and blank spots, obviously, that it is in negotiation regarding the sovereign immunity waiver. And obviously, we want to make sure that that is pursued, because that is a very important point, that if that ever comes up and sovereign immunity is not waived, that we could be left holding the bag. The other thing was the TIF that he had, that David had mentioned, that there should be a minimum requirement of Milfordians hired, whether this committee would like to put a percentage on it. And the other thing that David had mentioned is that in the host agreement currently, it says that they only have to live here for 3 months prior to be considered a Milford resident and to be considered as a town hire, which that's very easily met. For them to move their people up here for 3 months, I mean, that's training for them before the casino opens. And they are technically considered a Milford hire, which that is no good. Whether we recommend a 6 months or longer, maybe a year, whatever. But I think that the 3 months that's currently included in the host agreement is absolutely no good. So, so he had that as well, and I had that. And the percentage higher, if we wanted to, there's nothing included in here currently of a required percentage higher of Milford residents. If we wanted to recommend, he threw out a number like 10%. I know they argued that obviously they will look for candidates that can meet all the requirements. Obviously, we've heard the requirements. They're rather stringent, obviously, because in the gaming environment, there has to be strict regulations. But we want it, there are plenty of opportunities there for them to hire Milford residents, and we thought 10%, or he thought 10%, I'm reading it, was a good number. So that was mostly what Mark had. For that, he has very strong feelings on the, that we get informed on the transfer of, and we've all had this question of what happens if this place closes? What happens if this place is transferred to the tribal nation? What kind of issues? And obviously, we need to have that addressed. I had a question in the host agreement and about the term of the contract. In here, it says that it will go as long as the Category 1 license is given to the town. I'm assuming, what I've read, I think that's a 15-year contract for each gaming license. I don't know if anyone knows that.
Yes.
It is it? And it says in here, this is auto renewal. My question is that after 15 years, when this comes up for auto renewal, as long as they get their gaming license back, does this host agreement go away? Is the host agreement renegotiated? It doesn't state in here what happens. It says it's an auto renewal of their agreement with the town. But are we allowed to make changes at that time? After 15 years, a lot of things may have changed. Is the host agreement allowed to be renegotiated after that? Like it says in here, just it's an auto renewal. To me, that means if it's in their favor, great, they can just renew it. If not, you know, can we get into it again? And the last thing that I had, oh no, I had two things. I apologize. In here, that they have only agreed to the $400,000 to the fire department. They have not agreed to the ladder truck or the improvements to the Birch Street Station, which to me are critical. I mean, that's that side of town. Those are important improvements that need to be made, and they right now, as of this host agreement draft, have not agreed to that. And my last point, it's on page E1, and to me, this is another important thing. In the community development money that we will be receiving, it specifically says in there that any community development money that we receive, they're gonna be subtracting any of the school aid that they give us. Doesn't make sense to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what, I didn't
I-
understand that. Okay.
So, those are my points, both on David's comments and Mark's points, on both the host agreement questions that we had, as well as comments for David's letter.
Okay. Phil, you were number 3?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was on the subcommittee with David and Chris, and I want to thank them, and I want to thank Paul, who did a nice job in really putting it together. I have a number of questions as it relates to the host agreement, and I know we just really received this host agreement, and it's some 150 pages. I took some time to go through the exhibits, and some of the items that we mentioned here are also discussed in the exhibits, so I want to make sure that in our letter, we reference the exhibits and at least indicate we understand what's here, okay? So looking at the first point in our letter, the real estate taxes, if you have the exhibits and you go to E1, it does talk about a guaranteed floor. It talks, and it says an amount equal to the difference between 18 million and the amount of real estate taxes and personal property taxes assessed with respect to the property. So their guaranteed floor is at 18 million, we talked about 19, but I certainly want to reference that, and we should look at that. And, you know, again, there's been, you know, a lot of discussion on the casino for the last 3 months, but this host agreement is moving quickly, and really, there's a lot in here. So, again, if you look at, and if you have the exhibit, it's E1, it talks about 18 million as being a guarantee, okay? Under the mitigation, and this is just really a point of inclusion, I think the sewer department has added 2 employees, David, so you might want to reference that as well. You know, the point about the COLA, I understand, yes, it is a CPI adjustment, and we should understand what that CPI adjustment is, okay? One of the things that was a little confusing to me was this community development fund, and it's on page, you know, E1. Does anyone have this? Does anyone? But if you look at E1, they talk about upfront payments, and it's $15 million of upfront payments. You know, 5 million based on certain dating. I don't have the dating, but there's 15 million of upfront payments. And where it's a little unclear to me is this annual payment section. When they talk about annual payments, they talk about a percentage of casino revenue, and I don't know how this all ties in. And we really need, you know, some expertise in looking at this agreement. And, you know, maybe at some point in time, you know, we could get Jerry Moody to come in and address some of our questions. But again, from a community development fund point of view, which really hasn't been discussed all that much, you're talking 15 million up front, as well as annual payments that look like they're a percentage of revenue, but I don't know how they tie together, okay? And that's in the same section that talks about the $18 million guarantee. And it discusses the Community Development Fund shall be administered by the town and used to eliminate, reduce, or mitigate indirect community impacts and any other negative impacts in connection with the project. establish a fund to compensate homeowners for any decreases in the value of their residence upon resale, et cetera, et cetera. It even has a grant program to fund improvements to multifamily homes, okay? But, you know, that's a big piece of this, it's really kind of unsaid, all right? There is a section that talks about, and I think Chris alluded to it, in terms of local residency hiring. Yeah, there is, it's talking about jobs, and this isn't great language, and this is a question I have.
C3.
Yeah, I'm looking at C2. Developers shall use its best efforts to strive to achieve labor participation goals so that no more than 5% of its workforce will be residents outside the area. They haven't defined the area yet, but again, we should be aware of that, and again, that's a question. What does area mean, okay? There's a
5%, that means 95%.
95%, 95%. Which is a big number, right. Okay, bear with me, because I'm flipping pages here. There was D3, and I was actually, talks about school aid, and on D3, they do a before and after calculation as to school aid. They do what our school aid contribution would be if the casino was not here, and then they do an after if it is here, and we get a payment of that difference, okay? So that's on D3, all right? Then my last comment addresses bankruptcy, and if you look at, not the exhibit section of the host agreement, but the host agreement itself, if you look at page 31, they talk about liquidated damages, and they talk about liquidated damages in the event of bankruptcy, suspension of license, and there's a whole number of defining characteristics. They also quantify what these liquidated damages are. It's $7,100 per day during the damage period. Again, we need help defining all these terms. And I guess my question there is that inclusive or exclusive of real estate taxes? So do we get damages in addition to the real estate taxes? I would think we would, okay? But again, that's a question. So, you know, my point to all of this, I think we did a great job and we're off to a good start, but you really have to, you know, as they say, it's a term that's overused, but the devil's in the detail, and there's a lot of detail in this host agreement, and there's a lot of detail in these exhibits that I think we really have to wrap our hands around, so.
Willie, you were number 4?
Okay. A lot obviously got addressed by what's been mentioned so far and by David's report. I think I just want to stress the fact that I think whether the 18 million or the 19 million needs to be the floor. Everything else, and it's probably how everyone else feels, everything else, true mitigation is everything above real estate taxes, occupancy taxes. That's great to know what we're getting, but that's what their commitment is just for building here and being. So for many things to be taken from that 18 or 19 million, or to be casual about, well, it can just get deducted from the 18 or 19 million, I think is a grave mistake. Based on the current financials of Foxwoods in Connecticut, some of the paperwork I shared with you folks via email, I think without going down a path of negativity, the positive is the fact that we are in the driver's seat. So they need this. And knowing that they need this, I mean, Moody's is pretty, you know, we're talking about serious people here who have a good reputation. I just think the fact that, you know, the property tax aside, the occupancy tax aside, we're in the driver's seat. We're in a position where we got to get everything out. The work that Chris did, the work that Phil just explained to us. I think this is, I know it's a compressed timetable, but there's a lot to get around here, and really, this is our one shot. And this is probably gonna be the biggest decision being made and the biggest issue facing the town in, I imagine, decades to come. So I just think nothing should be left off the table. I think we need to understand and really grasp everything that's presented. And quite honestly, I think that, you know, real numbers need to be presented in the fact that discussing the floor, discussing what guarantees, discussing the state aid, it is in the draft host agreement. And I think if nothing else, and sounding very general, is our message to the Board of Selectmen needs to be that we're here, we want to assist, we want to be part of the process, we're at the table now. And I think that some real specific numbers need to come out, and know that, again, they need this. They need this for their own existence, even in our border state. And I think, I just don't think we can be asking for too much, and we need to see a real commitment on their behalf, so that when people do go and vote, they know exactly what they're voting on. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Michael, you were next.
Just a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. I do agree that it's a good letter, David. Although I am sensitive to the tone of letters coming out of this committee. I want to make sure they feel as if we're being impartial. This is supposed to be an impartial board. So the subject line, preliminary concerns with respect to the casino proposal. Well, concerns kind of doesn't sound too impartial to me. I would perhaps say observations and recommendations. Sounds a little better.
Yeah.
Findings, conclusions, and recommendations.
Areas to be addressed.
No, you don't have findings.
Would you accept that?
Yeah, something like that, but
Yeah.
concerns makes it sound like.
Yeah,
it's
no, I agree, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, keep going.
Yeah.
As David was talking, and I apologize for having interrupted, I was just wondering, I'm assuming it's under mitigation, what if they agree to hire 10% Milfordians and then we do a review and they don't hire 10%? What's the recourse? What are we gonna do? Order them to stop and go out to the streets and hire 10, or do they have to pay a penalty clause? If they do something, I'm assuming it's part of mitigation, right?
Yeah.
We would-
Michael, they're talking about 95% from the local area.
Right.
The
So-
local area, 95.
Define the local
90,
area.
but you gotta
right?
define the local area.
Define Milford,
Yeah.
define the term, what's the recourse? They don't hire the people.
The ultimate recourse is money. More money.
I mean, they could make the case, not to interrupt, Mike, but they could make the case that says, we've interviewed every Milfordian, and they just don't possess either the knowledge or the background or the expertise that we're looking for. I don't think you'd take them to task for that, but.
So I just have difficulty putting clauses into agreements that, in the end of the day, how do you litigate it? I mean, how do you enforce it? So so either we make it a real agreement that has meat to it, or we say, yeah, we'd like you to do that, but if you don't, then, I guess it's okay.
Yeah, Michael, to your question, I mean, there are a number of default provisions here and remedies, and including that liquidated damages clause, but again, the legal lease is really overwhelming, and we need some outside expertise to clear that up.
To the next point that I wanted to follow on the stuff you were saying, Phil, also, I don't agree with Will's assertion that, we should be bargaining with Foxwoods, the Crossroads LLC, whatever they're called, because they need it because of what's ever happening in the casino in Connecticut. We should be comparing our host agreement with host agreements of other communities with prospective casinos in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Gaming Commission is going to award one casino license to the east. So our host agreement should be comparable to the host agreement that the city of Boston is negotiating or the city of Everett is negotiating. And to the agreements of the communities in the other two parts of the state, we should have a host agreement that's comparable. It should be equitable, because the Gaming Commission is gonna make a decision on what is best for revenue for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Where best to put a casino to maximize revenue for the state. So if we have a host agreement that is not comparable or equitable to one in Boston, that won't be part of their decision-making, at least I don't think it is. It's just as either gonna put us in a place that, to Phil's point, maybe we haven't really read into and maximized our ability to get what we need in a host agreement. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about what the mayor's doing in Boston for his host agreement. I know the MGM agreement in Springfield seems to be a lucrative one. We need to have an equitable, comparable host agreement. And I think we should reach out to those other communities to do a comparison to it. And that's really what we should be looking at, not whether or not Foxwoods needs it or somebody else comes in at the last. They are competing for one license in eastern Massachusetts. And the commission will make a decision, but we have to have a host agreement that's equitable with the other two in the east, certainly.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a point in response
Yes,
to that?
please.
I think maybe the response to that would be that we recommend that, I don't think it's gonna be us, because we just don't have the resources, but if the consultant or somebody sits with the selectmen and provides a comparison that's meaningful, they should ask for that.
I totally agree.
So that should be, I can add a provision to that effect.
Okay. Will, you had a comment?
Yeah, the only comment that I would make towards Mike's comment is that Milford is also in a very different position than the city of Everett, the city of Springfield. And I think that we can look at those host agreements. I have the one from Everett. Be happy to share it. But because of the due diligence this town has done and been well-managed, we don't have a 200-acre toxic dump site waiting for someone to clean in. We're not a depressed city where people are shooting each other in the streets in Springfield and they just want jobs. And I'm not gonna agree to compare ourselves to that. So the fact that we should be comparative to that, I have a real problem with, because we should be far above that. Because first of all, we don't need a casino. $19 million in additional property tax is great. However, I don't think the town needs to think like that, because I guarantee you in my lifetime, that acreage down there is going to be built, and it's commercially zoned, and someone is going to be paying taxes on it. I haven't said an opinion one way or another publicly whether I'm for or against a casino. However, we should be holding these people to a much higher standard than both the city of Everett, the city of Boston, and especially the city of Springfield, because we're in a far different position. And I think we only weaken ourselves if we send out a message that we should become, that it should be similar to those agreements. So, I mean, whether they're written up the same, that's fine. But whether the numbers are different, I expect our numbers to be comparatively very different, because we don't need this. And I think that's one thing that the general population of this town knows. No one has told me, and I have friends on either side with both signs in their yards. And one thing everyone agrees with is, we don't need this. Whether people want the jobs, people want the additional revenue, people want to have a shorter ride to go roll the dice, I respect all that. However, we don't need it to survive. And you know what, if it comes, we're gonna deal with it, and we're gonna deal with it well. I was 6 years old when the power plant came, and I was with a group putting flyers on people's windshields and this, that, and the other thing. You know why? We didn't want it. They ended up being a very good neighbor. However, you know what? If we weren't getting $1 million a year from Enron, we'd still be okay. We didn't sell ourselves out then, and I don't think we need to now. And I think we just be leaps and bounds above everyone and say, you want to come here because of the geography? You want to come here because you might get an exit off the highway? First of all, you can't get to Suffolk Downs. The blue line stops at 1, so that's done. And Everett, how do you get there from here? You have to go all the way into Boston, then go north. Most people don't even know how to get there. So we are in a prime position. So ask for the world, and if the Gaming Commission doesn't name it to us, I guess some people will be disappointed, but we're going to be just fine. So I think we just have to be. Go ahead, Phil.
No, I was
No,
just.
you done?
You done? I was
Yep.
waiting.
Yeah.
Bobby, you're next.
Couple of quick
Then
things. Thank you,
Phil.
Mr. Chairman. If I could direct your attention to your letter, Dave, on local hiring and residency requirement. In my opinion, the 6 months should be a year. I mean, even 6 months is pretty attainable, and how do you police that is the real question. Doable, but it requires resources. I was wondering, Dave, and again, this is policing, in the area of policing. The last sentence says, typically annual proof of hiring is required and is now monitored by the state. So the state comes into these towns and determines, for example, our TIF agreements. Some of them say, for example, 10% should be Milford residents. Do they go into these businesses and say, have you hired 10%?
Um,
I don't know, I'm asking out of ignorance.
I don't know if they have, but there's a form that the state asks the employer to fill out. And if they, and you sign it under the pains and penalties of perjury and by the taxpayer being
Yeah.
the company. And if they can question it, if they question it for any reason, they have the ability to go in if they think it's not accurate. Whether or not they do, I don't know, because I've never gotten that far. But, as I said before, there was an issue several years ago with TIFs when everybody came up with the TIF idea and they said, geez, what a great idea, and it was, and then it wasn't monitored, and then they realized when they gave TIF benefit in exchange for local hiring, the local hiring wasn't done, and there was nothing in the statute that was a penalty if you didn't fulfill it, so they were kind of caught. So now there is a penalty. You can lose your TIF benefits.
But it's only on a default basis. I don't think they're proactive every month and
Yeah.
going through all of these towns and say, let me see.
I think it's an annual form, kind of like your tax return.
Well,
There's
in
a
any
form if you
event,
go on the
I
Department
think,
of Revenue
you know,
website,
we
there's a
need to
form
nail
to create.
down the current verbiage with respect to the local area, but we should be more precise, I think, and nail it down to a percentage of Milford residents, and I think residency should be more than 6 months.
I agree with you, by the way, on the year. I just kind of
Yeah,
threw out
no,
6 months.
this is great job, don't get me wrong, I'm
No, I
not
agree,
gonna
but I agree. I think it's a
Yeah.
good point. I didn't feel strongly about it one way or the other.
And the last thing, Mr. Chairman and fellow members, the last page, paragraph 5 or bullet 5, I would be more in favor of saying the Finance Committee respectfully requests an opportunity to review and provide input prior to host agreement execution. It's my understanding, Mr. Chairman, when we first met on this, we were going to be more proactive, and we were going to either write or some form notify the Board of Selectmen that we wanted to be more active in this process. And to the best of my knowledge, we haven't done anything in those regard. Is my memory correct?
Yes.
Okay. But I do remember that. We talked about a number of things that we wanted to do, to be proactive and to be part of the process. And again, to the best of my knowledge, so it's more of a question than a comment, what have we done so far?
I'd like to amend it to say, to review and provide, to review and have an opportunity to provide input and to meet with the selectmen, then to comment in person. So providing input in writing is one thing, but I think it should be an opportunity to be heard in a group meeting.
I see it more, Dave, almost like the building committee that Aldo chairs. You know, we have a representative that attends every meeting. And I think we should have the same with the Finance Committee. This is, without a doubt, the most important decision this town will make this century. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Phil, you had,
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a quick follow-up to Bobby's point, and I think Will said the same thing, we certainly want to be part of the process here, and I think this is a kind of a launching pad to be part of the process, and this is a good first attempt, but I agree, this is a huge decision for the town, and we should give our input. On Will's point in terms of, you know, I did look at the financials, and I did look at Moody's report, and what Moody's said is that, you know, their market share in Connecticut is shrinking. They're getting competition from, I guess, Yonkers, New York, in Rhode Island. So, and unlike Mohegan Sun, which has a casino, I guess, in Pennsylvania, they were drawing that parallel, that Foxwoods is looking to kind of diversify a little bit, okay? So I think that's where Will was coming from with the point, okay? I think we should negotiate very hard, though. I really do, period. We should negotiate hard, and that's why it's so important that we give our input and we're part of it. Just as an aside, I did look at the financial statements for Foxwoods, which are very lengthy, and there's just a lot here. I'll just give you a quick thumbnail. They were profitable through 9 months. They were profitable to the extent of some 30 million, 42 million as compared to the prior year. They did do a huge debt restructuring, and they restructured their debt from something like 2.3 billion to 1.7 billion. That was signed off by all creditors. But the financial statements themselves are complicated. You know, the enterprise, okay, which is the casino, or the operational arm, is kind of an instrumentality of the tribe. So part of the financial activity is on the tribe. So the land's on the tribe and the debt is on the tribe. It's in here, okay? So it's not that it's not disclosed, but nonetheless, it's complicated and it's hard to get to, so.
Well, Joyce, what I'd like to do now is we have 3 members who have not commented. So I'd like to open it. Joyce, do you have any comments you'd like to add?
No, not really, because everything's already
Okay,
been gone
just want to make sure.
over. Yep.
Aldo, you're uncharacteristically very quiet.
Well, I mean, when you want to listen to the people that understand things, I mean, I just think that the point that Phil made and that they've all made is that we need to be sure that we get what is necessary to make it worthwhile if it does show up here. And that's it. I mean, you said negotiate hard, and that's exactly what you need to do.
Jerry,
I'm listening very carefully.
I just want to give you a chance to voice any questions or any opinions.
Not at this time.
Okay.
I'm gonna
Well, if
digest the material, yeah.
If there's no other comments, I've written 10 points, and what I would propose is that I read them, we comment on them to make sure I have them right, and at that point, we would hand over the 10 points to to David, to amend our letter and get it out tomorrow to our chairman. Does that make sense?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Point number 1, mitigation. It was brought up that departments, and I got it all written down, so we'll just, if there's mistakes or amendments, I'll correct it and give it to you. Departments of the town were not included, i.e. sewer, highway, but there's a number of others. This could mean an additional $1 million of upfront payment and approximately $1 million extra annually in mitigation. Second point under mitigation. What does it mean that Foxwoods can deduct community development grants from their payments? That's totally unclear. Sue Clark continues to get us community development grants. I don't know why that would count. Oh, I'm sorry, Jerry.
I just didn't,
What's the first one?
We have a report in front of us that was circulated. It was not complete. Chris found other departments that were not included in the report.
no, okay, I was more
No, I
worried
thought
about talking about
Sue's getting
grants.
something.
Okay, number
We've
2.
already found a couple.
Chris noted that
Getting 2 staff.
the agreement says Foxwoods can deduct community development grants.
Actually, it was payments for the school. so
Oh,
it wasn't
payments for the
community
school,
development
okay.
grants.
Yeah, I remember that, I didn't.
Yeah,
I didn't-
no,
Okay.
no, that was,
I stand corrected, that's good. Payments
thank you, Jerry, I was waiting, I wasn't sure if that was a
for
point I
the
missed.
school. And the question then is, how do you define it? Payments from where?
In other words, you get on one hand, you take it away.
Well, that's
on
what
the
it is, they were subtracting all
So
school aid.
if they subtract Chapter 70 money, then we're not getting a net number. The net number should be increased by what we would lose. I mean, a lot of people don't understand the philosophy. John Fernandez explained it, that the state sets a foundation number. We have to spend $10 per kid every year, or 10,000 actually, but say $10 per kid. They then look and say, Milford, you can afford to pay 6 out of that 10. So we're gonna backfill
Four.
4.
Oh,
Now,
okay,
if the
right.
state comes back in and says, hey, we're reviewing the formula, now that you've got this extra money, you can afford to pay 8 out of the 10, so we're gonna reduce to,
Because you got the extra
Could-
2 from Foxwood.
because you got, right. So that means our net number would be penalized by 2. And what I understood is, no, we should retain the minimum. So if we lose 2 from the state because Foxwoods is here, Foxwoods should pick up the other 2.
Yeah,
They need to come back and mitigate.
And that's, well,
that's
this is all
in
under
there,
mitigation.
that's
Right.
in, that's, you know.
But we're just asking for clarity to define.
If you look at D3, school aid contribution, again, it's a before and after, and they make up the difference.
Okay, again, under mitigation,
So-
the third subpoint, that the agreement only specifies 400,000 for fire, but exact funds for Birch Street and the new ladder truck are not spelled out.
Is it the new ladder truck or the rehab of the existing ladder truck?
again, the question is, are we gonna have to buy a brand-new ladder truck with extra stories? Whether we buy new, Chief Tui's always been great at figuring out what's the best alternative, but we ought to define, what does that mean? Is it, in our budget for 3 years from now, Long-Term Capital Committee has $1 million ladder truck. I don't know, Aldo, if that now becomes a $2 million ladder truck, or if we get that $1 million ladder truck plus $1.5 million ladder truck.
I spoke with the chief yesterday, and he sees two issues. The new ladder truck, which we know we need, because the one we have now is over 20 years old, and the existing ladder truck, which can be refitted and rehabbed and still be a frontline piece of equipment. Those are the two issues. Birch Street is not mentioned in there, even though it has been alluded to by all, and the rehab of the existing ladder truck is not mentioned, even though it has been alluded to. So there's a lot of confusion on that regard, and it needs to be defined.
And that's why I'm having here, they talk about it, but there's no definition.
Yeah, did you mention that?
Yep,
Yeah.
there's something in there, but you can't quantitate. Okay, sub-point number 4, there should be a hard minimum regardless of clawbacks. Whatever the clawbacks are, that they get to reduce this, or they get to deduct that, there's gotta be a real hard minimum. Dual tax rate, sub-point 5, should be maintained.
Non-negotiable.
Well, but again, we're saying the dual tax rate should be maintained, because we hear all these great benefits, but if you take 10 million off for dual tax rate, it doesn't leave a lot.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what the point is, though, it's in the letter already. I don't think we
Well-
have to amend anything,
Okay,
it's already said.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
but you also have to mitigate, remember what Mr. Morganelli said on the dual tax rate, when the credits go back because of the adjustments we make, and the meetings they make. We want to be careful that they don't benefit from that also and get a bigger piece of the pie.
If I remember correctly, 2 or 3 years ago, this committee voted to put $500,000 back to the residential tax levy.
Right.
And our barrister said, you can't do that.
I know we were.
It's against the law. You must put the money back against the levy, and everybody gets their
I
proportion.
understand that, but this is an agreement we're going to negotiate, and we need to put that in the
Yeah,
agreement.
and that's why I think the point before, it says there's gotta be a real hard minimum. Because if we do vote to put $1 million back, and they're a third or 40% of our tax base, by definition, they would get the biggest benefit, because they're paying the most in.
Yeah.
Phil?
Al, just in terms of referencing, they talk about the shortfall and the minimum of 18 million. That's, Exhibit E, E1. So you might, when you're talking about it, just reference to that, so, again.
E1.
we
Thank
can-
you, Phil.
We connect the dots.
Okay, the last thing is, we talked about subsidies to people who have diminishing property values and multifamily homes. One question is, how do you define it? What's the equation? But number 2, I don't know what controls you can put on, because if I have, a 6-family, 10-family home, and I'm gonna get a benefit out of this pool to rehab it, make it better, I'd like to see that benefit stay to the residents. If I'm the investor and you give me a great subsidy, now all of a sudden, my apartments are much nicer. And I think David mentioned it. You don't want to see the rent jump up because we used our subsidy money to make it better.
We want rent control.
I'm not saying rent control, but you gotta define something that says, hey, by the way, this isn't a free. Hold on one second. And the real key there is, the multifamily homes have been the bone of contention because of trash and everything else. So promoting, helping expand that, we have to understand what the impact is. Sorry, Willie?
No, just like at the last meeting on Friday, I have a problem that whole part being in there at all. I mean, again, like you said, that's been the problem with either why the health board has had to come up with all the regulations, the trash, the illegals, all this, that's been all these subset problems. So one, whether we want to take a stand on whether, we recommend that not being in there at all, or at least do something legitimate like owner occupied. There are still owner occupied people that own multifamily homes. And there is a difference between having an owner occupied with, you know, renters on the second floor than someone living in Florida and owning 26 units in Milford,
That's why
which
the-
they don't really care
The
too much about.
comment was to keep the benefits to the residents versus the investors. I don't know how to define it.
Owner occupied.
Occupied.
Either you limit it to a 2 or 3 family, or you say
I
owner
agree with Will.
occupied.
I think
Yeah.
if everything was owner occupied in this town, we'd have a whole lot less problem.
Okay, I will make that note. Now, the next point, point 2. Chris brought out that improvements that have not been fully paid for. We'd like a definition that if ownership changes or something happens, that the exposure isn't transferred to the town.
David mentioned something about with the land, right?
Chris?
That was one of the points that Mark had brought up, and I didn't fully understand in what instance that could happen, because to me, most of the project would have already been paid for by them previously, so I did not understood it. But he asked that question about improvements. I could not pinpoint any specific improvement after he brought the point up of what improvement could have been made. The only thing I could think of would be things that was done to our property, not theirs, such as the fire station or the sewer department, any things directly at our town property. But on that specific point, to be honest with you, he gave me that point, and I looked throughout this, and I could not find any example that I could think of an improvement in this town that
Just ask him for
we
clarification.
would owe
Just
afterwards.
ask him for
David, can you take it on to either clarify or eliminate point 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think maybe the point is also, from what you said, Chris, is that Mark was concerned that they were going to incur or accrue costs and then leave, and then we're stuck
Okay.
paying for costs that were, you know, whether it's ordered or other goods in process or work in process. So maybe the indemnity clause that's in the agreement
Okay.
covers.
That
So
could
if they're
be
in a
it.
10-year
Is it
lease
comprehensive?
and they
Yeah.
bail out after 4, who's stuck with
Right.
the 6?
Okay.
If it's a big fire truck or something, we kind of own it?
Yep.
Okay. Point number 3 of the 10, CPI adjustment. There seems to be a need for clarification of what does this fractional CPI mean?
Yeah.
So we get a better understanding of
Please. I'm not-
what are we getting? Point 4,
They refer to, just in terms of language, CPI adjustment factor. So what is the CPI adjustment factor?
okay, point number 4 is sovereign immunity waiver. I mean, I don't know how that applies, but Chris, you or Mark brought that up, is that?
Yep, Mark's big issue with that is that in the agreement, if the LLC is purchased by the tribe later on, with their tribal immunity, can they throw this host agreement out the window? Because there is indication in here.
Yeah, I think that's the point.
Well, there is indication in here that on page 31, the transfer of ownership, it can be with consent and without consent of the town. And there's 2 different ways that they can pass ownership of the LLC. And I had noted that, and I didn't bring that up because Mark had brought up the tribal immunity. But that, with any transfer of the ownership of the Foxwoods LLC, if it is done by the tribe, what kind of implications can we be looking at? And can it be totally avoided any question by them simply signing the waiver of tribal immunity?
Okay, point number 5, I'm going to paraphrase, but, because we had 3 different numbers used, but we all seem to agree that 3 months residency definition seems rather short, and we really believe that 12 months is more realistic. And when I think of a lot of colleges, you know, if you want to be an in-state student, it's not 3 months. You know,
6 months either.
it's not,
Yeah.
it's like a year.
It's a year,
So we all agree that we think a year is more realistic. Number 2, the hiring area needs to be addressed, because if you say the hiring area is the earth, then, I'm being facetious, but,
Worcester County.
Jerry?
It's true. Mind just a second.
Could say the universe.
I'm concerned about the residency issue, that it's 12 months. But I'm also concerned about another subset issue, and that is verification.
Okay,
We-
hold on. The subpoint C is the report on compliance. There ought to be a definition of, is it every 6 months, is it every year, that they believe they're supposed to present to the selectmen some type of report that says if the definition is, but it doesn't spell it out, Jerry, it says the area.
I
And
understand.
again, I'm being,
You're talking about area, I'm talking about the residents.
but the residency, if the area is Earth,
They're both, they're one and the same. We
if
gotta
it's
do both.
Massachusetts or New
We
England,
gotta do both.
then the compliance is easy.
Gotta do both.
You gotta tie both together, and there's gotta be,
Because it's currently 3 months in the host agreement.
Go ahead,
That's
Al.
true.
and there's gotta be a compliance report defined and
It's
a
gotta be zip
periodic
code and-
report basis set. And then there ought to be some type of, I don't wanna say penalty, but mitigation that says, okay, you are telling us you cannot find more than 10 Milford people to hire.
Yeah.
Okay, why? Well, they're not qualified. Well, that's like saying I love my mother. You gotta put a definition around it.
Train them.
But,
Train 'em.
again, Bobby, that's my point.
Yep.
Hide the train.
I want, or we want a report on compliance, and then a way that if you're not meeting the compliance,
It's a remedial action step.
to remediate it. But we have to define it, because there's nothing there,
Right, remedial action plans.
okay?
Mr. Chairman, just to back up, you know, we talk about the CPI. If you go to the host agreement, if you look on page 5, they define CPI and CPI adjustment factor, so.
Yeah.
You just want to be aware of that. It looks like it's a typical,
What section, Phil?
it's page 5 of the host agreement. It looks like it's a typical calculation of CPI, July to July, using the Bureau of Labor Stats, 1984.
We may have missed it,
But,
okay, good.
no,
It's
we
in there.
did see it.
No, it's in there.
But
The
it
question
also-
is, why are you using it? Why? Because that does not advantageous to us.
Why?
I had no, it is in there, and I have
Why
a
not the
star.
straight
I
CPI?
have a
It is
star
the
in here. What
CPI.
Oh,
No, it's not the CPI.
Why isn't it?
The
It's an
CPI
average.
adjustment factor is an average, that's exactly right. Read what the CPI, and every time they mention that they would adjust any amount in here, they said they would do it by the CPI adjustment factor.
It says
They do not
it
say-
goes from July to July every year.
In the denominator, but there's two things, and the denominator should be the CPI public.
And they use the 84 index. And they go July to July. I don't know. Anyway,
well, put
I
it
just
this
want to
way.
make you aware.
If they explain it, then we'll be happy.
Put it in there, right.
Yeah.
Okay, the exit strategy.
Yeah.
In the contract, we talk about liquidated damages of $7,100 a day. We don't have a clear understanding of what that means. So if you're paying $7,100 a day, does that subtract from your floor? Is that an additive function? We just need to know, what does it really mean?
See, yeah,
And
anyway.
how does it impact what they pay us? So, Aldo,
Triggers it.
what triggers it? Okay. Hold on. Now, the term of the contract is 15 years with an auto renewal. We'd like to know what happens on 15 years plus 1 day. Do we get to renegotiate? Do they get to renegotiate? You know, is it that they can automatically turn around? I know a lot of the auto renewal contracts we have, if you don't agree to change it, the terms stay the same. So the question is, what happens 15 years and 1 day from now? Do we get to say, no, things have changed, we'd like to come back?
I think you'd have to do it before the 15.
Well, yes, but
Yeah.
I understand, but what's the period? Because normally, in that kind, at least the contracts I've dealt with, you say you have to announce within 90 days, 180 days, that you don't intend, or you would like to reopen the contract terms. So we just want to know, what are our options? Point number 8, the floor, Exhibit E1 states $18 million.
Oh, one other thing, Mr.
Oh.
Chairman, not only what our options are, but what we are maybe allowed to do. I'm not even sure how the Commonwealth gets involved with the host agreement.
And that to me is what are our options, because like when we wanted to put money towards the residential tax rate, and Jerry said, no, that's against the law, okay, not an option we can go through, so I agree with your point. We need to know legally what we can do, and then from the contract, allow us
Yeah.
the broadest flexibility under the law.
Yep.
Agreed? So again, Exhibit E1 states the $18 million floor.
Yeah.
We want to make sure it really is a floor and there's no
Yeah.
special clawbacks.
Yep,
Okay. Community development funds.
yeah,
Phil had mentioned there's $15 million of upfront payments.
yeah.
That's above and beyond the.
That's over and above, as I understand it, and that's the question.
That's
That's why we're asking, yeah, you wanna clarify, there's 15 million, and they also talk about, and I'm trying to figure it out, these annual payments. And it references a percentage of casino revenue, with kind of a dollar cap to it. And I don't know if that is the mitigation amount on an annual basis or not, or that is in addition to the mitigation amount. And
Subpoint B, Phil, you brought up, said annual payment is unclear as it references percentage of casino revenue
Yeah.
and does not address if it affects the payment.
Right,
So we need to know.
right. We need to know what that is, period. That's a huge hole, you know.
Okay. And the last one that we had, point 10, was local aid, where it says you're gonna do a comparison of before the casino came to town and after, so.
Yeah. That's
What's
on-
included? Is that just chapter 70, which is the school?
Yeah, it actually references chapters.
It references it, but how about chapter 90?
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
it's a
you
question.
turn around and say, if the same, and Representative Fernandez said, there is a movement to look at redoing the formulas. So if you're a surrounding town, you may want to promote that those formulas get changed, because we would have a hard time, and you can debate the magnitude, but if somebody was to say, Milford can afford to pay more for chapter 70, chapter 90, or pay, accept less money and meet their obligations, because now you got 18 million coming your way, I don't know how you legitimately argue. The question is it dollar for dollar? So if we lose $2-3 million, you know, out of chapter 70, and we lose $1 million out of chapter 90,
Well, you have to put that in, that they make,
Yeah.
and I think Phil's already made the point that those are referenced.
and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Our point
Right.
that David, we're asking him to include is, this should be defined. We should understand, what does that really mean? Is it just chapter 70? Is it chapter 90? What
think-
other funding could be altered?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I think, and the way it is written is it says it's the differential in chapter 70 between before and after, pretend the casino isn't there compared to when it is there. To make it simple, I think it should just say total state aid, comparing if you were here and if you weren't here. Because that'll encapsulate all impacts that we might not even be thinking of, just make it simple.
So I guess my next question is, did I miss anything? Or is this our recommendations to the subcommittee? Are these our recommendations?
You know, can I add one thing?
Sure.
On page 31 of the host agreement, it talks about liquidated damages, just clarification as to how they, you know, what does that apply to? And is that impacted by other payments, like real estate taxes or annual payments? You know,
Okay.
how does that kind of work? All right?
I'll add that to point
But,
6.
yeah, just to help you out, it's on page 31, so,
Okay,
okay.
I got it. Okay,
I
did,
I do have another comment, especially on what the other chairman, Mr. Shane, has said. Seems to be concerned with bankruptcy and what happens if they leave town tomorrow. and-
Oh, yeah. Can I talk about
But this is a unique situation here, because whoever gets this casino in the eastern part of the state, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is essentially saying, this is your casino. So I don't think they're gonna be very happy if all of a sudden there's no revenue coming because somebody goes bankrupt. Is there a secession provision that's either at the state level or would be in our host agreement, where if Foxwoods had to leave town or go out of business, that we would have an invitation for other casino runners to come, establishments to come in and take over the
and Mike,
facility?
the only thing I've heard is when Representative Fernandez was here, he mentioned that there haven't been many instances of, you know, the new option, that bankruptcy, but he said in the couple cases that he has heard, that the judges tended to take a harsh view on using bankruptcy to obviate any of the promises or commitments, that basically the judge tended to look at their gaming license as being dependent on them meeting what they promised, so.
Right. So, but my point is that the gaming license is almost married to the casino that's built, because once they build one, Eventually they'll build some more, but not for a while. There's gonna be one casino with one license, so whether Foxwoods gets the casino license pulled from them or not, you still need a facility that's operating, generating revenue for the Commonwealth. So I'm
And-
assuming there has to be some succession provision, something.
My concern is not that the casino goes out of business, but Willie brought up, when we brought in a power plant, we increased the levy, I believe, and this is too many years and I'm too old, but by $2 million. We put a floor in of 1 million. So as the property values changed, if you used a formulaic approach, they would pay less than $1 million.
Absolutely.
But they're good neighbors, they're good citizens of Milford, they're paying $1 million minimum. But what a lot of people forget is the levy went up 2 million. I don't remember ever reducing the levy or having the ability to reduce the levy by that $1 million. So when, you can't do it, that I understand. So that extra million got spread out amongst the current taxpayers. And we forget that, hey, we absorbed $1 million of levy against our taxpayers. And that's the real concern I have over a hard floor, is if we're increasing the levy by, let's say, 20 million, and their floor is 18, if their property values change, and I don't profess to understand how property is evaluated, but if they change to 18, we got $2 million that we're gonna spread out over the taxpayers.
Maybe we need to think of a different way of doing this.
Well, and again, I don't know how, but that's the concern that I think is real, more real than them going out of business. So, did I miss anything, guys, or are these the 10 comments that we will give to Dr. Morganelli?
Yep. Very good, Al.
Okay, what I'll do
Very
then,
good,
just so
Mr.
we have it,
Chairman.
is I'll make a copy, send it to you tonight, or first thing tomorrow morning, and if you can, just
Yeah, I'll.
breeze over it and send David any comments tomorrow, so that he can incorporate it and get it into Mark, so we can have it for the selectmen. Anything else?
Don't forget to say.
No, I won't. Well, I want to thank you. This is a lot calmer than I expected.
Well, I mean, what is our strategy going forward? Are we just going to send this letter into the selectmen? Are we going to personally meet with them? Or do we have a strategy?
What I understood is this would go to Mark Thursday, like Thursday evening. He would prepare it, whatever he wants to do as chair, submit it to the selectmen. And one of the points we're bringing up that's already in David's letter is, we want to be more active.
Right.
So reading a report, like the day after it's signed, as a resident, I think you owe me.
So
As a
I'll,
FinCom, we ought to ask for a seat at the table to talk.
It's a
So
good
I-
starting, go ahead.
okay, no, I think we need to be more aggressive. I think we need to meet with the selectmen at one of their meetings and say, hey, here's what we think, here's the time we've invested, here's our report, here's what we've done. If the vehicle is going to simply be, here's a letter.
Can I make,
Again,
can I just
Bobby,
respond to that?
Well, if I could,
Because Mark already answered that question.
Because too
Okay.
many people work too hard, Dave, to let this
Well,
thing
David,
fall
go
by
on.
the
Mark
wayside.
asked me to go to the meeting on Monday and be the spokesman
We did, okay.
at the selectmen's meeting.
I wasn't cognizant.
Only issue being that I have a golf tournament and I should be back in time.
golf
But-
quick.
Golf very quick. No, but I have to drive a little
I have a
ways.
golf tournament as well, so.
I have to drive a little
I-
ways,
I would-
but
I would
I should be
go.
back in time, and so, but everyone is welcome to attend.
Monday
Sit on
night.
the other side of the fence.
And
Yeah.
realistically, Bobby, I think you've hit a point. If all we do is send a memo to the selectmen and we do nothing else, then we can't expect them to do more than read the memo and carry on. I think we have to say,
Moreover, Mr. Chairman, it's, I hate to use the term, but it's almost an insult to the work and the time and effort that people in this room and others have done.
and it's almost an insult to the residents. They've counted on us to do our due diligence.
Good point.
If all we do is send a
Yeah.
memo,
Good point.
shame on all of us.
Good point.
Yep, okay.
Well said.
Okay,
Great.
anything else?
Great.
I would just equate it to, I have to get my last 2 cents in. If you were a company and you were about to make a big acquisition, who would you consult first? It would certainly be your CFO, your accountant, your financial team. So that's the role that we have here, and we should be consulted.
Any other comments before we
I move
wrap
to
up?
adjourn,
Move
Mr.
to adjourn,
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Motion on the floor is undebatable, move to adjourn.
Debatable.
Second?
Undebatable.
All in favor? Thank you.